Welcome to November and Beyond. I'm your guest host this week, Jonah Wheeler. Dave wanted to be back there doing some technical work to make the show a little bit better, so I offered my services today to interview our local candidate here in Keene, Sean Filio, who's joined us today. And Sean, thank you for coming on the show.
It's good to be here, and it's good to chat with you. We haven't had an opportunity to chat before.
Absolutely. No, we've been on some Zoom calls together, but actually this is the first time we're meeting each other in person. Yeah, it's good.
It's exciting.
It is.
Of course, this is now an exciting time of year. We're about 6 or 7 weeks out from the primary,
right?
So we're getting to crunch time now.
Right, and you're running for office, so tell us a little bit about that. Why are you running for state rep? I mean, this is a tumultuous time. What gets you to want to do a job that pays $100 a year?
Well, aside from the $100 a year, I'm running for state rep in Keene's Ward 2, which is on the east side of the city. It's one of the larger physical wards, but we try to keep it equal population-wise. Running for it because there were a few issues that really motivated me. Right now we have an incumbent Democratic state rep who I feel like is not representing the best of what Democrats can be. There were a few votes in particular that this incumbent took that really offended me. In particular, voted for a bill or a common law defense called the gay panic defense. This is a defense to murder that says that if a person were to murder another individual, that they could argue to have that murder downgraded to manslaughter. So it would still be a crime, but have it severely downgraded if they were to argue that the other person provoked the murder because that person was hitting on them and that person was gay. There's not a straight panic defense. There is not a black panic defense or an Asian panic defense. There's just a gay panic defense. Now, the legislature tried to abolish this defense earlier this year, and my state rep, the Democratic state rep from Ward 2, was one of only 3 Democrats in the House who voted to uphold that defense. That's morally reprehensible. There's no excuse for it, no justification. No matter what you're trying to do, you're trying to justify hate. So no matter what rhetorical trap you set yourself into, you're justifying hate.
Yeah, what was his justification for doing that vote?
It's been meandering, but the justification has been that we needed to open it up, that if we're going to abolish the gay panic defense, that perhaps we also need to get rid of the Asian panic defense and not allow for there to be a black panic defense or a Native American panic defense. But that's illogical because there's not been documented cases of an Asian panic defense or Native American defense. There are documented cases of the gay panic defense nationwide each year. And the American Bar Association recommends that all states abolish this defense, and that's why our New England neighbors have done so. We're alone in New England in maintaining this moral abomination. New Hampshire likes to think of itself as being unique, but this is not the uniqueness that we want. Now, by maintaining this defense, it actually achieves the opposite effect that he wants, because it creates the precedent that we can allow for this particular type of the defense, so maybe it could open the door to arguing for those other defenses. By slamming the door shut on the gay panic defense, we actually disallow for those other types of defenses to be made. Really, what it was the Republican talking point that has always been used to argue against LGBTQ rights, that it's creating special rights for LGBTQ individuals, that we're creating a special type of right by not allowing for this defense to be made. That's bogus. In the end, he voted for hate. No matter what the excuse is, it voted for hate. Period. There's no excuse, there's no justification. Voted against LGBTQ rights, and a person who does that is not my representative and does not represent the best of the party. It needs to find other things to do with his time, and so I'm going to unseat him come September 13th.
Well, thank you for running. I'm sure there are many in your community who need to hear that message and haven't heard what he's done. And I think even if you lose, I mean, this is an important message that which needs to be brought forth. You know, these people need to be, the boat needs to be rocked a little bit, I think. So So what other issues inspire you to run? I mean, tell us a bit about yourself. Who are you? I mean,
Sure. So a little bit about myself. I'm actually a Keene native. So I grew up in Keene, graduated from Keene High School in 2000, and then went to Boston for my undergraduate, and then actually went to Australia for my PhD and lived in Australia for 7 years before boomeranging back to.
where in Australia?
I was in Adelaide, Australia, which is on the south central coast in the Bight, just in the middle there. So I lived right on the coast. It was beautiful, gorgeous,
Beautiful. That's awesome.
and very, very far from home.
Yeah.
So I love the weather, love the warmth, particularly during the winters here. Sometimes I wonder why I'm in negative 20
Why are
degrees.
you back?
Yeah. But I truly do love New England, and I enjoy being back. And so I came back to the States and decided to shift careers and went back to law school. I'd always loved politics, always loved law. I've grown up in a political family, so kind of always knew that law school was probably in the future. And I did so, got my law degree. I clerked in the U.S. District Court for the District of Massachusetts, so I was a federal law clerk. Worked with the attorneys generals of 3 states, and now I'm in practice with a law firm actually out of New York City. I work remotely that does plaintiff side securities work. So they
wow.
take on those who have worked to defraud investors. We stand up for the little guy, trying to get them their money back when they've been defrauded from the stock market.
Which has happened a ridiculous amount. Over
There's no
these-
shortage of work.
No shortage of work at all, no whatsoever. And you said you taught at Keene State political science?
That's right. I teach some political science courses each semester at Keene State, teach Intro to American Politics, which has become a very popular course over the last few years. I think students are really trying to figure out what's happening right now, which perhaps all of us are trying to figure out what's happening right now. But getting a good grounding in the basics of American government by stepping back to the Constitution. And how were we originally set up? What are the institutions of American government? What are the 3 branches, and how were they originally supposed to work before everything fell apart? And how can we put it back together again? I think that's an interesting question.
How have the kids been in class over these last few years? I mean, I'm an education organizer. I work a little bit with kids, and I just went through the public school system myself, and I can see the apathy firsthand with a lot of our youth these days. I mean, I say that as a youth, and I think, is that reflected in the college space too? Is there a lot of apathy, lack of engagement in the political system?
It's a struggle right now to teach, I think, at any level.
Right.
And I think COVID is the culprit, that when you're trying to engage in a classroom setting, when you're staring at Zoom for hours at a time, it's hard to get that person-to-person connection. And even when we came back to the classroom, it was difficult, I think, to then re-engage and figure out, now, how do I step back in the classroom now and re-interact with people, particularly since I'm so used to being able to do this in bed with the camera off and lay back and not really
Barely pay attention.
And so it really came on to me to try to find ways of trying to engage with the class and use teaching methods that I hadn't used before. Really trying to use technology in ways that were challenging to me. But in the end, an educator has to be creative and has to find ways to re-engage. And so it just meant I have to get more creative. And sometimes I succeeded, and sometimes I didn't, and I could see the glazed over looks. But we worked together, and I'm excited for this year to go fully integrated again. We're no longer going to have hybrid, at least that's the plan right now. Of course, everything goes day by day, but I'm excited to be able to be back in the classroom and have everybody there and no longer have faces on a screen.
Absolutely, absolutely. And hopefully we can break that apathy a little bit in those kids. And
How was it teaching high school? I can imagine that's even.
oh, I don't teach
oh,
high school.
no.
I was just in high school.
Oh, you just
yeah. I just graduated in 2021.
That must have been a challenge to have the final few years really disrupted in that way. I think back to my own senior year of high school, which was such a special and formative year, to have that kind of taken away in that manner.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, I remember. Oh yeah, it was rough. I mean, but I think everyone adjusted in their own way, and Conval came back to in person fairly quickly. I didn't go back in person. I stayed remote because I was doing a lot of organizing work, and I actually, funny enough, the pandemic launched me even further into organizing, and I got to do that basically full time for the last 3 years, which has been a real blessing. But that was rough, having those last few years stripped away, and I could see it in my peers as well, how rough it was for them and how they took it. And like you said, I think COVID is a lot of the main culprit for what's going on right now. I think that they're feeling the apathy because they don't think that much of the world will be there for them pretty soon. I mean, climate is a big part of that too, I think. We face a really tough challenge here in this world, and I think last session in the State House, I don't know if you were involved in the organizing in that a little bit, but I remember being in the gallery and seeing the Republican state reps and their behavior towards the process and how they pushed through legislation that was just terrible, and how Democrats were so overwhelmed by that. Tell us a little bit about how you're planning on dealing with half of a house which seemingly you wouldn't be able to work with.
Well, I think you always have to try to begin with a conversation. That I think if you go in with the mindset that you're going to be unable to work with it, half the house, you're going to be unable to work with half the house. That I think that we can try to find common ground on some issues. And I think one of the common grounds that I'm going to hopefully be able to find ground with is on cannabis legalization. That if we're going to take the Free Staters at their word, then this should be common ground number one. If it is about personal freedom, then let's give personal freedom and let's finally get the job done for Granite Staters, because the overwhelming majority of voters in the state want cannabis legalization. And it's just good public policy, because this state has a budget crisis. Now, for anybody who takes a look at their own budget statement, whether you balance a checkbook or you look at your banking app on your phone, you know that it's dollars in and dollars out. Well, this state can't cut dollars out anymore. We can't cut social services anymore. We're at bare bones. So we're going to have to bring more dollars in. Well, most people do not want more taxes in this state. Our property taxes are as high as they can possibly get, and an income tax or a sales tax is a non-starter for most people, and I don't want to see a sales tax. Part of the New Hampshire advantage is that we don't have a sales tax. It draws in shoppers from around the area. But one of the ways that we can start to bring in more money is to legalize cannabis. That we know from our personal lives, if you want to bring in more money, some people call it moonlighting, we call it a side gig, you get another job. Well, for the state, getting another job means bringing in more revenue from other sources, and cannabis legalization is the state's side gig. It's already happening. People are already using cannabis in this state. I hate to shock people, but it's already happening. They're just buying it from our neighbors. So we are willfully giving away New Hampshire dollars to Vermont and to Massachusetts. Well, I don't want to give away New Hampshire dollars to Vermont and Massachusetts. I'd rather keep it here and start using New Hampshire dollars to do things in New Hampshire. And so perhaps that's area number one. We can start to find common ground with the other side is let's do personal freedom and let's do fiscal responsibility by bringing in a little more dollars to start to balance this budget. And maybe if you can find a common ground on one issue, maybe you can start to find it on other issues as well.
Absolutely.
But then you have to have a backbone. You need to have a fighter in the House. That these are people who have also shown they are not willing to negotiate on particular issues, and they will run you over. So you need to stand up to them as well. We need to elect pit bulls into the House and not poodles. You need to be willing to fight, and those who have not demonstrated a will to fight perhaps are not the appropriate representatives to have for this session. So think about those who are willing to fight. And fortunately, from going to law school and to standing up against the people that I've stood up against, I know how to fight. and I know how to give a speech and to passionately advocate for the issues that I'm passionate about.
Great, that's great. I think the people of Keene would be well served by you, definitely. What do you know about the process of the House so far? I mean, have you engaged in the sessions at all the last couple of times?
So ironically, I actually teach classes at UNH Law, and I teach legislative process. So I've taught the class. And so actually at UNH Law, I am the advisor to Lambda, which is their LGBTQ law association. And the law association worked to give testimony to several of the committees that were considering several of the bills that we're working on, Don't Say Gay, the gay panic defense, and also a few of the reproductive right bills that would have impact on the LGBTQ community. And so I worked with them to advise them about testimony and other things, as well as worked with other students at the law school who were thinking about giving testimony in Concord about what good legislative testimony looks like. That good legislative testimony tells a story because people are compelled with stories. They're not necessarily compelled by hearing statistics and a recitation of law.
Right.
While a good law lecture certainly gets into statute, good testimony does not necessarily do so.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I guess there is a tiny bit of an elephant in the room as we're here in Cheshire County. So you're in a primary against a Democratic incumbent who's been there for 8 years, and I guess this has caused a tiny bit of drama on Facebook, as a lot of people have seen. And I guess this translates to a couple of other primaries in Cheshire County as well, which has led to the accusation from some of a Democratic circular firing squad happening here in this election. And I think understandably from a lot of people's perspective, if there was a Democratic circular firing squad, we face the Free Staters in this great danger. What would your response be to those people who see you as focusing on the wrong issue in this moment and just sit down and let them handle it when we know they can win? What would you say to those sort of skeptics of a primary?
I would have a few responses. First, elections are the accountability mechanism that our Constitution created. We have elections every 2 years to hold our representatives accountable to the people. If we just were going to have representatives who served until they no longer wanted to serve, our state constitution would have been written that way, but it's not. We have elections every 2 years to hold our representatives accountable to the people. Not only that, but our parties have primaries for those elections to hold our representatives accountable to the parties. If we were simply going to let the sitting representative hold the seat until they no longer wanted it, then our party wouldn't have primaries. So it's illogical and it's wrong to say that we should simply allow the incumbent to hold the seat until they no longer want it. Now, there's something unhealthy that has happened in primaries in Cheshire County and largely throughout the state. We don't have primaries. In my district, we haven't seen a competitive primary since 1990. This literally means
1919 or
1990, 1990.
1990. Okay.
So
Wow.
in more than 30 years. So we have voters in my district who have not been alive for a contested primary. They've never seen one before.
Wow. Yeah.
And even for those who have been alive for it, they've not seen it in a long time. The memory has faded. This is what a primary looks like. They're competitive, they're heated, and they generate some tough discussion. Because a primary is the accountability mechanism, what you're holding the sitting representative accountable for is their votes. But that is the important part here. You're holding them accountable for their votes, the work they have done as a representative. The focus must be on policy and issues. Keep the focus on policy, vote, and issues. Where an election can go awry is when you start to make it personal, when you start to talk about a person's character or the person as an individual. That is inappropriate. That is negative, And we are better than that as a party. That's what the other party does. They talk about character. We are the party of policy.
So, well, just to be devil's advocate for a little bit here, I mean, what would you say to the person who says, well, if you win a primary, you're less likely to win a general election because they're an incumbent? I mean, I don't think that argument necessarily holds merit, but I feel like some people who subscribe to the circular firing squad narrative are saying, well, I think we need to hold true to the people who have won before, and if they're running again.
Well, there's a few points to that. First of all, if they do hold the support of the voters, they'll win the primary. So let them run, let them prove themselves. Also, there is that argument that the primaries are just going to hurt the party, that it's just going to draw out rancor in the party and disagreements, and that's going to hurt the general election chances. The literature, the scientific literature from political science that studies thousands of elections across the country disproves that idea. That primaries do not hurt general election turnout. And in some cases, they actually generate more turnout because they've drawn attention to that election. But they don't hurt primary turnout. That is a narrative that is used by incumbents to try to advocate for themselves or to try to dissuade challengers from a primary. Primaries are healthy because primaries are democratic. We have a primary on September 13th in this state to hold incumbents accountable and to choose the type of party that we want to be. If your district has a primary, look at those candidates. They're offering different visions of the party, and decide what type of party do you want to be. And then those will be the candidates to advocate those issues, hopefully in Concord. Perhaps you like the incumbent. Perhaps you think they've done a great job. And if that's the case, lovely, re-elect the incumbent. But if you think they have not used their power appropriately, if you think they voted in a poor manner that does not represent your values, then you don't have to vote for them. If that doesn't represent our party, then they should not represent our party and they should not represent you. But after the primary, we do need to come back together again as a party, because the things that unite us are greater than the things that divide us. And ultimately, we've seen the harm that the other side will cause us, so that we need to come back together as a party. And I will tell you one thing right now. If I do lose my primary, and I don't think I will, but if I do, I will endorse my opponent on the spot that night when I see the election results. Because that's what you do in a primary. You get the results, and then you move on, because that's the mature thing to do.
Not the Trumpian way of handling things.
No, because that's how the other party does it.
Right.
The other party whines, complains, and then they cannot move on from it. And 2 years later, we're still litigating the results. In the Democratic Party, we handle it the Democratic way. We get the results, we accept the results, we move on, and we move on as a single party.
One would hope so, definitely.
Yeah.
Sometimes that's not always the case, but one would hope so. And I think in this election year, everyone should be more than cognizant of the fact that there is an enemy out there that is greater than the fight that we're facing here in the Democratic Party, and this fight that we're having in a primary. I mean, in a number of primaries, people accusing us of being, some coordinated effort to take down the Democratic. Ridiculous. This is about the energy that the party has, people who have faced struggle firsthand, who understand the issues, and can stand up at the dais in the State House to demand change, working together with the organizers, with the people in their communities to get something done. That's what's going to oppose the Free State Project. It's not sitting back and electing people who are we're comfortable and safe with. It's taking the risk and saying that this is a time for a movement of people which have had enough with what's going on here today.
I'll tell you what coordination is. It's 20,000 people descending on the state to alter our state's politics in a catastrophic way. There's coordination on the Democratic Party. I haven't seen it yet, Nobody told me to
No.
run. Nobody's told me what issues to advocate.
Even on the progressives.
And I've certainly self-funded this entire thing so far,
Okay.
so I would certainly appreciate some of that coordination money. The other side is the side of coordination.
Yeah, where's
but-
that Soros cash?
Yeah, I would appreciate it.
Exactly, yeah. Seriously. Well, Sean, I mean, we face some steep issues, some very, very high obstacles, but I think with spirit, with a backbone, and with a story to get it done, I think we'll get it done. So I appreciate you coming,
Absolutely.
speaking today, and Dave, I hope I did a good guest job for you. Good, he's giving me the thumbs up. So
No, we have this primary September 13th.
13th. Yep.
And I think that a compassionate story to tell, a story that tells the voters, we are the party of hope, we can drive this state forward, and we can end this bad public policy the Free Estaters have given us, is a narrative that can win.
A party of vision. A party of vision. So thank you all very much. I mean, that's our show today. Goodbye. Goodbye. Thank you.